Hello, beautiful people. Welcome this week to the new episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. And today we'll continue the conversation on education and education financing because there is so much to say. So, hey, Representative Emilie Kornheiser from Brattleboro, thank you for being here today.
Hi, Olga. It's so nice to be back here with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, I'm glad you were able to make some time because I know your schedule is very busy as chair of Ways and Means, and the new legislative session is like right around the corner. It's
Hmm.
breathing down our necks as we speak. So, Emilie, today I'd love to get your thoughts on education financing. Just for listeners, the December 1st letter came out from the Department of Taxes talking about a potential 12% increase. VT Digger reported yesterday that the Scott administration has pitched a $75 million buy down of that increase. And then, of course, we also have the school district redistricting task forces report that came out recently. So we've got a lot of moving plates on the table, Emilie. Of all those things, where is your focus right now?
Oh, Olga, I don't get just one focus. Um,
Okay,
I
so
think
what are
it,
the plates you're moving around the table?
yeah, I think it's probably helpful for us to talk about the December 1st letter,
Great.
and talk about, there are about a dozen reports that were all called for in Act 73, the redistricting task force just being one of them. And
Mhm.
so talking about how those pieces fit together might be
Great.
helpful. I think December 1st letter is a good jumping off point to understand some of the reasons for that,
Okay.
for why Act 73 happened in the first place. And then all of this is happening in a context of really extreme federal action that has, as much as, Vermont is a place that feels safe day to day for many of us, not for all of us. Um, we are not immune to really significant impacts from recent federal action, and that has, impacts on our economy, impacts on our state revenues, and impacts on our legislative session. And so everything we do related to education is all sort of sitting in that other budgetary and policy context. So maybe we could talk about all three of those things.
Yeah, let's do it. Where would
Okay.
you like to start?
We'll start with the December 1st letter.
Okay.
So, regular listeners will remember that we talk about this at least once a year here on the Montpelier Happy Hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't go too far into the weeds, but I will say that the December 1st letter comes out on December 1st if we're lucky. Last year it came out a little bit early and it really disrupted my own personal schedule.
I
Um,
remember that, yes.
so annoying. So anyway, came out on December 1st this year, which was nice of them. And it is a required in statute that the December 1st letter comes out on or around December 1st. It's a consensus forecast, meaning that the numbers represent an agreement between our joint fiscal office and the tax department and the Agency of Education. They all work together, bunch of little number nerds sit around a virtual table and sometimes a physical table, and they figure out an estimate of what property taxes would need to be set at if the legislature does not take any further action.
Mm-hmm.
So, bunch of assumptions there. One, the legislature always takes further action.
Yep.
Two, they're working with very preliminary numbers. And this year's December 1st letter actually comes with an assumptions attachment, like an appendix, that if folks really want to go in the weeds, they can look at. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm excited they've started adding that.
Actually, I
So,
agree with that. Yes.
great. I'm glad you're also excited. Thank you.
Oh, nerd out over everything. You know me.
Yes. So, things that will definitely change. The amount of revenue that's expected to come in that's not property tax revenue, like sales tax revenue, rooms and meals tax revenue, that is going to likely change when the emergency board meets the second week in January.
Mm-hmm.
And all signs point to probably that revenue might be downgraded, which means even more money would need to be raised with property taxes. It's also very preliminary estimates of what schools are planning on spending
Hmm.
because their budgets are far from final when they send them to the Agency of Education. And so those numbers will likely change. Um, Often a very high December 1st letter can mean that those budgets go down a little bit before they hit their final, but not always. There's also a lot of other numbers in there that are subject to change. The total grand list can still shift a little bit and then pupil counts are also not
Hmm.
finalized. And so the per pupil spending and its impact on tax bills, that is also very subject to change. And those numbers were particularly preliminary this year. So all to say, this letter predicted around a 12% tax increase. Some of what I described could bring it up. Some of what I described could bring it down, and legislative action is inevitable.
Hmm.
This is an average tax increase. It's not an average rate increase. It's not a consistent increase. This is the average change in someone's tax bill. And in years, a few years ago, we had the atrocious policy problem of really passing on all of the needed property tax changes directly into people's bills. And when we were looking at almost a 20% average bill increase, there were communities that saw their tax bills go down during that time.
Okay.
And so it really is like an average.
Hmm.
Other highlights of the December 1st letter that I think are really important to point to is the very last paragraph
Hmm.
of the letter, which I think is on page 5,
Okay.
includes the spread in per pupil spending last year.
Right. Oh, I'm glad you're touching on that because I was, not
And the reason,
doing the work myself. I was like, this is important, but I don't quite know why.
yeah, so from my perspective, the reason we have the sort of system we have with that includes the December 1st letter and the fact that the state is obligated to pay the full budgets that are voted on, and it's all a statewide fund and all those things. The reason we have that system is because we passed Act 60, right, in the 90s. And the reason we passed Act 60 in the 90s was because we had profoundly unequal opportunities for kids in our schools.
Yeah.
And for me, that incredibly widespread and per pupil, per weighted pupil spending, that means that we're accounting for differences in need and there's still that big spread.
Mm,
Um, that means that we have really inequitable access to opportunities, educational opportunities in our state right now. And so for me, there's the problem of the December 1st letter right in front of us, which is about like, how can we make sure that our schools are funded, our kids' needs are met in the immediate term while keeping people's bills low and consistent, right? There's that
mhm,
problem. But then the bigger problem that I want to talk about in the context of Act 73 and follow up from that is that not all of our kids are all right. And
mhm.
our kids are not all right in very, very different ways around the state. And it is a small state with not that many children. From my perspective, it is really just unacceptable that we are seeing some kids really not even come close to getting what they need.
Yeah.
And so that's what really motivates me on this reform work.
Mhm,
So, things we can do about the December 1st letter, we can use general fund money as we did last year to buy down the rates. That is a short-term solution, but it means that we essentially need to keep on doing it. It makes it look like a tax spike every year, creates a big news story. It's
mhm.
really disruptive to families and communities and school districts.
Yeah.
We do that on a one-time basis. And there are not a lot of other options. Even if we wanted to raise new revenue to put into the education fund to cover this gap, most revenue sources would not be available if we passed them this coming year. They would not be available for FY27.
Okay.
So even if we created a new income bracket or something like that, that money wouldn't be available until FY28. And
Interesting.
so that's a really one of the harder parts of this work is that a lot of sort of short-term tax remedies or short-term revenue remedies um, are often the less progressive and often less progressive than property taxes. Um, and so I think most Vermonters would rather pay property taxes than say like increased sales taxes on their day-to-day purchases,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
That hits even closer to home, I think, for a lot of folks. So that's kind of part of what we're grappling with. People have ideas sort of across the board, like if we just put tolls on our highways, we could fix the ed fund. If we just taxed weed more, we could fix the ed fund. Um, None of those solutions really account for like the really profound scale that we're talking about here.
Okay. Scale of
Dollars.
dollars. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Well, I think we always need to remind ourselves this problem, this funding puzzle, did not happen in 1 year. It's probably not really going to be solved in a year.
It won't be solved in a year. And Act 73 really set us up for like a 5-year transition
Hmm.
to really solve a lot of the pieces of this puzzle and to improve opportunities for kids.
Hmm.
And there's gonna be if we are able to fully implement that, there's still a few years in between now and then that we're gonna need to get through.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I have heard some folks talk about uh, is everything that schools are delivering, should all of that come out of the education fund? For example, if schools are delivering mental health services,
Yeah.
should that be coming out of the education fund? Is that part of the conversation as well?
It's very much part of the conversation. It's unfortunately like so much more complex than I think it feels on the surface. So for one, okay, let's say we're going to put more money into mental health services so that schools can provide better mental health services, and we're going to pay for that out of the general fund.
Hmm.
That's still money we need to find in the general fund that we don't necessarily have in the general fund.
Okay.
So, like in terms of fiscal transactions, that's not all that different from just transferring money from the general fund to the ed fund to pay down property taxes, right?
Hmm.
Um, the reality is that technically the general fund is already paying for mental health services for kids. We
Okay.
have a system of designated mental health agencies that operate in every county in every region of the state that are able to bill Medicaid for services for kids. Um, and what we're seeing is because those are partially because they're chronically underfunded, partly because they're chronically understaffed, partly just because they don't provide the exact tailored services that some schools are looking for, schools instead hired their own internal staff.
Okay.
And because that's in some ways easier for them. It
Hmm.
makes it harder for them to bill Medicaid.
Okay.
Um, Frankly, a lot of those folks in the schools are getting paid more than the folks at the designated agencies. So it actually exacerbates that staffing crisis
Oh,
that
interesting.
prevents the designated agencies from being able to serve the schools, right? And so we create like a vicious cycle there. Um, but at the end of the day, the schools are obligated at the federal level to deliver these services, right? I
Right.
mean, not that the feds like really care at all anymore, but
But the obligation is still
the
there.
obligation is still there, and certainly the ethic is still very much
Yes.
there for schools, right? And so they're obligated to provide these services, come hell or high water, no matter what fund they're drawing the money from. The education fund is a always open tap,
Hmm.
right? Because we raise taxes to match the obligation, whereas
Right.
the general fund we spend to match the taxes that are raised. And so we have one limited resource and one unlimited resource.
Mm.
And I mean that technically. I
Right.
understand that property taxes are not an unlimited resource. I want to
But
be
how
very
these
clear
things
about that.
function.
But how they function in terms of just like basic fiscal flows,
Hmm.
that's how they operate. And so the natural tendency is going to be for the schools to hire on their own in order to get the kids' needs met, no matter what we do with the designated agencies at this point.
Okay.
And so that is a really hard nut to crack. So if we want to look at like hard and fast remedies, do we ban school districts from hiring their own mental health staff, like that, the state intervening at that level on hiring decisions at the district level, that's unheard of. And
Mm,
also would get like, okay, so they can't hire certified social workers, but can they hire peer support workers? Like, where does the edge even of like what staffing we allow and what staffing we ban? It'll become a really slippery slope that any rational administrator would find loopholes around, right? So that's one example of this really sort of regular conversation about we're paying for things out of the ed fund that we should be paying for out of the general fund. And there are dozens of examples that are pretty much just like that one.
okay, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate
Yeah, it's so frustrating, Olga. Like it's frustrating not like on a human level, like they're very reasonable questions that people are asking and they're very reasonable questions to ask. Um, but there are all the easy solutions have really been
Yeah.
enacted at this point. Yeah.
That really resonates with me, Emily, because I feel often that as a state, we'll just take housing and our workforce shortage as an example. If we want so badly to have like a silver bullet and solve the issues, and some really well-meaning, hardworking people are trying to solve the issues, but we've reached this sort of crisis, might be a little dramatic, but we've reached this point where the problems have become so entrenched
Hmm.
and so complex that, like you said, the kind of low hanging fruit or the silver bullet options have been either tried or put into place, but there's still so many other things that need to be done.
Yeah, so one of the big cost drivers folks talk about in the education fund is the cost of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually did a lot last year to bring down the cost of healthcare for teachers. In addition to enacting reference-based pricing, which is a huge step forward, we also changed the way pharmaceuticals can be billed and a few other things. All of those things add up to a real reduction in health insurance premium increases for teachers and for school districts. But they also put our hospitals and health insurance systems at risk, right?
Yeah.
So it's all a tricky system, and it's all to some degree, a closed loop. I was talking to Molly Burke last night after a community forum at the library,
Uh-huh.
and she had mentioned earlier in the community forum that this is going to be her, I think, 18th year in the legislature.
Oh my gosh.
And
Her
afterwards, I
career
was
can
thinking,
vote.
what?
Her career can vote.
I know. Oh, I love that. I love that. Um, I hope I remember to repeat that to her, Olga. Um, and I was saying she's one of the few folks left in the legislature that remember what it was like to legislate under really challenging fiscal circumstances. And she was like, yeah, sure. But the thing that stands out to her the most is just how much more complex the problems have become.
Yeah.
And that when she started, just all of these tipping points in systems that were frayed really hadn't kicked in yet, whether that was housing or healthcare or education. And we've really sort of, all of those systems have tipped over, partly because of widening wealth inequality, partly just because things can only be dysfunctional for so long before they break.
Hmm.
So you know, that's what we're all working with here.
And you had mentioned the December 1st letter, federal changes, and you just wanted to make sure that you touched on those. And since I just want to make sure before I ask a next question, was there any other sort of plate you wanted to put on the table for perspective?
Um, no, I think that's helpful. I can talk about the federal stuff next, or we can talk about Act 73 and sort of what that looks like next. It's up to you. I think
Um,
that
hmm, go ahead.
my tendency is for the federal stuff because that's like
Okay,
more table setting, but it's totally up to you.
let's do that.
Okay. Um, so, and I'm really like, I've been struggling lately, Olga, to talk about this stuff and not just sound like the biggest bummer in the whole world. But that's sort of what I have. And I think,
Honesty's the best policy, honey.
yeah, and I did not run for office because I wanted to like hold the line or, um, like deliver basic services. I ran for office because I wanted, I mean, you remember, like, I really wanted like more than people's basic needs to be met. I wanted people to thrive, right? Like, I wanted to create an economy where Vermonters could really thrive and have time to show up for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And now here we are, and the Trump administration has made some really significant changes that impact states in very explicit and obvious ways, and then a lot more subtle ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, explicitly and obviously, we have lost the premium tax credits, and that's going to mean that people's health insurance bills are going to go up a lot. We're going to see real limits to Medicaid,
Mm-hmm.
and that will mean that some people are going to be uninsured, and some people will have to buy health insurance and not be able to afford it. And we're going to see real cuts to food stamps. All of those things mean both folks, regular Vermonters struggling to get their needs met, whether that means they're spending more money or they're receiving less care. It also means that other systems, like our hospitals, become much more fragile. And it means a lot less revenue going to the state for the state to provide other services.
Yeah.
Um, so that money that the state is accustomed to receiving can either be backed, we can attempt to backfill some of that with other state dollars. But in the current and political environment we're in, with a governor who is explicit about no new taxes, no new fees, that means that we're going to have to cut from somewhere else to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, pretty much everything is already very underfunded.
Yeah.
So there's that
And
piece
we
of the
should say
puzzle.
chronically underfunded a lot of
Chronically
it.
underfunded, yes.
Yeah.
And like that is part of, just a minute ago, we were talking about how these systems are really breaking after many years of neglect. That's really where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneous to that, reduction in federal dollars going to the state, federal money going to the state, and increased need to spend at the state level is a reduction in state revenues related to federal changes. So the feds have made very explicit tax giveaways to the richest, right? That was the basis for the continuing resolution that passed this summer was tax giveaways to the rich and to multinational corporations.
Right.
And those tax giveaways trickle down into Vermont tax base. And what that means is that some folks will be doing much better. Um, those who can most afford to pay more are going to be paying less.
Mm-hmm.
And it will reduce folks' tax responsibility under Vermont state tax law if we don't change things. So that will be a reduction in state tax revenues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in
The
other
other
words, people in the higher income bracket will be paying less Vermont state taxes as
Unless we
well as
change our tax
federal.
policy.
Okay.
Yes. Because the definitions between the federal tax responsibility and the state tax responsibility match up in a lot of
That's
cases.
right. That's right.
So, and then the second way we're going to see a reduction in state revenues is our economy is very fragile right now because of things that the Trump administration has done. So there's the tariffs, which have caused a huge reduction in revenue along the border with Canada.
Mhm.
So short-term rental fees going down that the state receives and going to the education fund, sales tax revenues, meals and rooms tax revenues, cannabis revenues, all of that going down um, because of tariffs.
Mhm.
And then a lot of businesses in Vermont who are in some ways taking the tariffs as part of the cost of doing business are seeing their revenues going down. And so that makes less revenue for the state as well.
Mhm.
And so we have less revenues from three different buckets, state revenues, state revenues that we get as sort of pass through of federal revenues, and then federal dollars to state. Three different ways less money is coming in as a result of federal action. And then the fourth is that the economy is incredibly unstable right now. So I think, gosh, Olga, like when we were still in COVID lockdown, we had a show together on the happy hour where we talked about um, how economic growth post-COVID was an alligator chart with really, or like sometimes we talk about it as a K
Mhm.
chart.
Yep.
And, the wealthy are getting wealthier and the poor are getting poorer, or the poor are sort of receiving some benefit, but much, much slower.
Hmm.
So we're still seeing that. That's still expanding under this particular economy. But all of the usual indicators of economic growth, like strong jobs numbers, strong savings, lower debt, none of those are happening. The only place that we're seeing economic growth right now is in the stock market.
Hmm.
And all of that growth is actually being carried by just one sector of the economy, and that's the AI growth.
Oh, interesting.
And so if you take the AI growth out, and this is part of the presentation that we received an all-member briefing from the legislative economist.
Hmm.
It also is material that I received at nonpartisan conferences that I went to all summer and fall from folks from like Moody's and other like big economic forecasting firms. Um, just in case people think I'm like doing my own math at my computer. I'm not. So if all of that growth in the whole, if you take the AI
Hmm.
sector out of the economy, it doesn't look like it's doing well anymore by
Mm.
any accounting. And so that creates a lot of instability.
Yeah.
And when we have a lot of fiscal instability, it's hard to do the crisis spending that we might want to do right now because we're all worried about it getting even worse.
Hmm.
And so that makes decision making even more conservative than it might be already.
Yeah.
And so that's some of the environment that we are grappling with, both our education system and all the rest of our state
Mhm.
challenges.
We have to hear from some underwriters, but before we head out, I'll just share with you I was recently interviewing someone um, and talking about tariffs and inflation and jobs and how that was impacting the her sector. And she said the biggest thing, the tariffs haven't quite shown up in her work. But the biggest thing the federal changes have done, the Trump administration has done, the tariffs have done, is created this sense of uncertainty.
Hmm.
And to what you said, yes, decision making becomes more conservative, she says. But the other thing it does is it starts driving up costs
Hmm.
because people are trying to like hedge their bets, but they don't know which bets to hedge. So it's just, she's finding just the uncertainty itself is starting to make her costs go up.
Yes,
And I just thought that was very fascinating.
it really is.
Yeah. So, folks, stay tuned. Emily and I will be right back after we hear from some underwriters on WVEW. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW, LP Brattleboro. If you're just joining us, I'm your host and producer, Olga Peters, and I am speaking with regular contributor and representative Emilie Kornheiser, who represents Wyndham 7, which is Brattleboro. And she is also chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. And we are talking education financing and basically financing in general because there's very few things that our education system does not touch. I think when you look at the big web of all the ways education touches our lives, from the money, from our kids, from what we learn and how we carry it into the job market, to the economic drivers that schools can be. Um, it touches so many things. So, Emily, thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, and I want to remind listeners that the views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guests, respectively, and not the station that
Well done.
they're on. Yep. I didn't even need my cue. I remembered my role here, Olga.
Yes, you did. And we also want to quickly thank BCTV for taking the video version of the show and sharing it with stations around the state. So, Emily, let's segue to Act 73. Listeners may remember last week, Senator Wendy Harrison was on the show and she talked about her work on the school districting redistricting task force. I hate
Right.
whoever came up with that name. Um, and the recommendations that the task force made, which includes creating a cooperative style education service areas, um, high schools, comprehensive high schools, as well as some strategic mergers. Um, Emilie, from your perspective, you've been deep in the weeds on Act 73 as well. What did you feel like? What could it do? What couldn't it do?
So I'm going to back up and say what the purpose of Act 73 was.
Okay.
Because I think it is a very wide sweeping, far sweeping, comprehensive piece of legislation that sets in place a 5-year timeline for
Right.
transformation. And there are so many pieces of that that I think it's really hard to keep track of them all. And in that, one loses sort of the point.
Mm-hmm.
So the point, I think, of the bill is to improve educational opportunities for children all around the state
Mm-hmm.
and to create consistent and fair opportunities for education all around the state.
Mm-hmm.
Been talking to Lachlan Francis a little bit about all of this, who, you know, local boy, grew up in the area, went to BUHS, went to UVM. He's now the chair of the Democratic Party here in Vermont. He lives in Westminster. His dad worked for the town of Brattleboro for a long time, and I think was even on the show a couple times back in the day, maybe.
I
I don't
don't
know.
know if he was. Lachlan's been on the show.
Great.
Yeah.
Um, and he's very good at like bringing stuff down to center in a way me and my numbers don't always make happen. And he was, reminding me, and this is something I know from my summer work working with youth, that there's a lot of schools in the state that can't field a football team
Mm-hmm.
or a soccer team, that don't have enough kids to like have a prom,
Mm-hmm.
where kids can't join a journalism club or a
Name your club
queer
of choice.
or a queer and allies club, right? Where a kid with a specific special educational need, maybe even one as sort of normal as, say, Down syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
might be the only kid like that that the district has encountered for years. And what that means is that kids are not necessarily like kids have to fight really hard for the opportunities that they might need, or they might just not get the opportunities that they need, that a lot of us and a lot of kids other places in the state consider like super normal and par for the course and just like what an education looks like. And so that is one big piece of like why Act 73. The second piece, and that's like, our state has changed and we have to change with it. Those opportunities were available all over the state for a really long time, and we have fewer kids now. And so, and the world is different. And so we need to be different too. The other piece is tax stability. It is not okay for someone's bills to go up by 50% in a single year. Like people cannot plan for that. It's not
Mm-hmm.
okay. I think there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had about, are we spending too much on schools? Are we spending not enough on schools? I think the answer to both is yes, depending on where in the state you are and how that spending is happening.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But across the state, the stability of tax bills is really, really important. And the stability of your tax bill in Whitingham is impacted by the decisions that my school board here in Brattleboro makes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need a statewide solution for all of that,
Yeah.
because folks in Brattleboro don't have a responsibility to think about folks in Whitingham with the way our system is set up right now.
Mm-hmm. And
So
vice
those are
versa.
the two big problems we were trying to solve, to sort
Mm-hmm.
of stabilize the cost curve, bend the cost curve, however you want to talk about it. But it wasn't about reducing spending. It was about stabilizing and creating consistent opportunities around the state.
Mm-hmm.
we did that in a whole bunch of ways because we have tried in a bunch of little ways before to take on each of these pieces. We had Act 73, we had Act 46, we had Act 60. We've done like a whole bunch of stuff. But unless you tackle governance, programming, standards, however you want to call it, and finance all at once,
Mm-hmm.
one sort of cancels the other out because it's such a linked system.
Mm-hmm.
We also can't tackle taxation without tackling spending because in order for the taxes to be consistent, the spending needs to be consistent. And so the bill does a lot. It significantly limits tuitioning to independent and private schools around the state in order to make sure that schools are reaching the scale that they need,
Mm-hmm.
so that all sort of kids who are publicly funded are attending public schools, so we can have enough kids in our schools that are receiving a quality educational opportunity. Um, it changes tax credits in huge ways so that folks whose property values might go up will still be eligible for tax credits.
Mm.
Um,
Okay, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, for folks whose incomes might go up just slightly in one year, they won't get sort of kicked off the tax credit boat.
Mm-hmm.
Does all of that. It sets up a system so that we can tax second homes at a higher level than we tax primary homes.
Mm-hmm.
Long asked for, but none of that works unless we stabilize spending. And we do that with a foundation formula so that kids from no matter where they live, like Barry or Slate Valley in the Rutland area, can have the same access to opportunities that kids in Brattleboro do.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for a foundation formula to work, districts need to be able to move money back and forth throughout the schools to really flex around class sizes being of adequate scale. And in order to do that, you need a district that's big enough to actually make that happen.
Okay, interesting.
And so we had the redistricting task force. The redistricting task force, which I did not serve on, and oh my goodness, I am so grateful to the people who did. This is like education work is such hard work, and the chair of education, Peter Conlon, is just like always saying, like, you know, it's just some of the most emotional policy work you can do.
Oh,
Everyone
yeah.
remembers, everyone's gone to school. A lot of people have sent a kid to school. A lot of people have worked near school or in a school. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people get their health insurance from their school, whether they're, it's their spouse or themselves. It's property taxes, it's trying to, someone's home. It's emotional stuff, and
Mm.
everyone's an expert on it. So it's hard work.
Oh,
And
yes, we all are.
the group, right? This group of folks on the task force really dove deep into this idea about whether or not new larger districts would save money.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that it doesn't consistently save money. And I agree, it doesn't consistently save money. But for me, that wasn't the point of the new larger districts.
Mm.
Um, and so I think, yes, BOCES is great. Those
Mm-hmm.
cooperative educational services, we actually already have those in law, and there's one is just formed, and
Yeah.
it's going to do great work. It's going to do a lot to make sure our special education services are significantly of higher and more consistent quality at a more reasonable cost. Super excited about that. Really glad we passed that into law a couple of years ago. Comprehensive high schools are fantastic. I think it was always imagined that new districts would have comprehensive high schools as part of them.
Mm.
Um, Really, sort of best educational outcomes are linked to having sort of smaller elementary schools and larger high schools.
Ah, okay.
And then we've been wrestling with what to do about career technical education in Vermont for a long time, and a comprehensive high school is also best practice for that. So fantastic. Comprehensive high schools are great. I think there's a question about what that means in sort of each community, where the comprehensive high school sits. Is it in the city center? Is it in the most rural community? So everyone has to track to it. Like, what does fairness look like and how do you pay for it? Great questions that we are going to tackle this year and next year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think it's a yes and I feel really, I'm really looking forward to like getting back into the state house so folks can stop talking past each other about this.
Mm.
Because I think a lot of the governor's response and the way that some of the task force's work has been sort of reported in various places has made it seem like an either or situation. And I think it's very like everything about Act 73 is yes and.
Hmm.
Yes, we need to lower healthcare costs. Yes, we need to build more school buildings. Yes, we need comprehensive high schools. Yes, we need cooperative educational services. Yes, we need tax reform. And yes, we need some of our districts to be larger than they are now so that they can serve students fairly. And
Hmm.
all of those things, if they don't happen in a coordinated way at once, I think we're going to wind up with some of the chaos that we've seen at the local level over the last few years. We're going to see the conflicts in communities that are trying to close schools in an emergency basis, like we saw in Wyndham or we're seeing in Marlborough. We're going to see kids whose special educational needs are not met, like the lawsuits that we're seeing all over the state right now. We're going to see families voting down their school budgets time after time while teachers are like out on the picket line begging to get paid instead of inside classrooms teaching kids.
Right.
And like none of that is good for our state. And so for me, that's why Act 73 has all those yes ands in them, is to say, like, yes, we need to do everything so that we are moving forward productively instead of just letting change happen to us. Sorry for that, like, super monologue, Olga.
No, I'm actually really glad you said that because one thing as I was preparing for this show, and listeners have heard me say this, I'm trying to be much more explicit in returning to our original um, inspiration for this show, which was what are the stories we're telling ourselves and how is that shaping policy? And as I've been, as reviewing the commissioner's December 1st letter, I was looking at some of the things from the governor's response, reporting, that type of thing. And in the December 1st letter, the commissioner writes Vermont is at a crossroads with the urgent need to choose. And he basically laid out two options. And what I wanted to ask you is, are we at a place where we only have two options? Um, are we at that kind of crossroads? What's the narrative that's happening here? And you, in a way, sort of answered my question with that monologue in that we really need a yes and approach rather than an either or approach, is what I heard in your monologue.
Absolutely. And I think some people are hoping that we can get out of this without making any hard choices.
Ah,
And I don't think that's true. I think we are going to need to make some hard choices. And I think most of the pieces of Act 73 that people are really excited about don't actually work very well without larger districts.
okay.
And that's going to be really hard
Hmm.
because I think Vermont's identity as this place of micro governance is really important to people. But what I see at the end of the day is that folks really want influence on what happens in their individual school. They
Hmm.
don't necessarily want influence on like what happens at their district, right?
I think
And
that's probably
so
fair. Yeah.
I think when we think about scale, it's helpful for us to think about sort of where our control will still sit at the end of the day and where we might already have control that we're not actually interested in leveraging. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it that I think is an interesting from sort of a storytelling perspective is I don't know if you remember when Lola DeFort and Sarah Meerhoff were the two State House reporters for Vermont Digger,
Yeah.
and they had this ongoing joke about Governor Dead.
No, I don't remember that.
Mm. So Governor Scott has a much beloved persona in Vermont. And part of that is he always manages in his communications, especially with the legislature, to take this like, I know more than you do, and I'm going to do what's right for everyone attitude in a way
Yeah,
that is often like quite kind of condescending of the legislature, and feels quite gendered at times, though I'm absolutely sure is not intentionally gendered. Um,
I think you're right. Yeah.
and I think part of that is that his particular attitude as a leader and as a strong leader is much more of sort of like a command and control, I know what's best attitude.
Hmm.
which clearly has been working for him. Like, I don't want to act as though it is not working for him. It is not a way that I am capable of acting.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think some of that is, how we were both socialized.
Mm-hmm.
And it works for him. So, who am I to say? But what I will say about it is that context where he creates this dichotomy on, say, this particular issue, um, makes it really, really hard for some of the softer caucus building, collaborative yes and conversations to take place because he's drawn this clear line. You're either with me or you're against me.
Mm.
Instead of saying, like, yeah, we agree, like true collaboration, consensus, um, compromise from my perspective is we say, like, yeah, we're all agreeing on this outcome. We have some differences on how we're going to get there. Let's sort through them together.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of dichotomy of you're with me or you're against me, which feels very much like in keeping with the political moment we're in globally, I think makes it really hard for us to make decisions in the state house
Mm-hmm.
and make nuanced decisions that we are able to communicate to Vermonters.
Okay.
And I think some of
Interesting.
that is purposeful on his part, and I think some of it is just like his way of being in the world.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, it has worked. So why not keep doing it?
Hmm.
Well, thank you for that because when I look at a lot of the communication coming out of the governor's office, it is that either or. And um, I guess for my part, I look at the policy building process as yes, you need all branches of government. You need the consensus building, and then you need someone who can carry it out and make decisions
Hmm.
as the landscape changes.
Hmm.
Um, and so the either or doesn't necessarily resonate with me because as you go through the policy building process, if you're doing it well and you're taking testimony and you're getting data, multiple options should arise that you can
Hmm.
choose from.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. What about the narrative about, because I hear this so much, and I'm not necessarily sure it's wrong, but I'm just wondering if it's the right place to be putting our energy.
Hmm.
We hear the story over and over again of we're paying more money to educate fewer kids. Um, and while I think that I'm not saying that's wrong. Like I said, I'm just wondering if focusing on that actually puts us in the right place to change anything. Is that making sense?
It does. I think both points are important points. I don't know if putting the 2 points together is useful.
Okay.
So we have fewer kids and the same structures.
Mm-hmm.
Do these structures serve fewer kids the same way or as well as they served more kids?
Okay.
That's an important question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
We need to answer that question. I would say no. That's my answer to the question. After, like, thinking about it a lot and
Mm-hmm.
continuing to think about it and being curious. In some places, yes, and in some places, no. And there are a couple districts that have grown.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we have the other question, we're spending more than we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's for good reason. Some of it might be wasted dollars. Those are
Mm-hmm.
important questions to answer too. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think pairing the two of them together gets us where we need to go because I think most Vermonters feel that their bills right now are unacceptable, feel that they want more for our kids, but do believe that investing in our public education system is one of the best investments we can make as a state.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that that pairing of fewer kids, more money loses that really important nuance and set of values that Vermonters really hold dear.
Well, it almost sets up a false cause and effect,
Hmm.
a sense of cause and effect that may not actually be there.
Agreed. Agreed.
We have just about 5 minutes left. So, what do you think is important to leave people with on education?
I would love for folks to take the time to have really complex conversations about this stuff, like the one we've had today.
Mhm,
Um, to like, try to sit with me in the curiosity I'm working really hard to hold in this moment. That there are like, it's going to take multiple changes. There are no easy solutions to this. Our kids really matter. And I think most of us want what's best for
mhm,
our families and our communities and our kids. And so I really invite people to be in touch with me to have nuanced conversations about this, which is hard to do, on social media. Sometimes it's even hard to do in the grocery store, though I love that attempt. Um, but to keep on having those conversations with each other. The other piece that I really want to ask people about and to sit with are I think we have this theory that like the whole heart of a community rests in its school.
yeah, I think
And
that's fair. Yeah.
I don't know if that's fair to those kids.
No, probably not.
Um, I think our communities and really the significant population of older Vermonters we have right now might need something different from our communities.
Hmm.
They might need a different form of community center.
Hmm.
I wonder how many of us have been in our public school buildings in the last 5 years. And so to really like ask ourselves if we could start from scratch, and I know we are not starting from scratch. I very much know that. But if we like could wave a magic wand, what would we want the center of our communities to be and to look like?
Hmm.
And I think that's an important question we need to think about as we do this work as well.
Hmm.
Also, folks can find me at emiliekornheiser.org or like be in touch via the telephone or an email. Just put up my name into the little Google machine and all the ways to contact me will pop right out.
Perfect. Um, so, Emily, I'm going to quickly answer your question about the heart of the community because we do have a couple minutes.
Oh, good.
I think I go back to the concept of third spaces. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a really healthy community has multiple third spaces that are, in a way, sort of interconnected so that you always have a place as a community member to kind of find your third space.
Yes.
And I think I use that vaguely third space because I think it's different for each community.
It is. And it's one of the interesting things to me actually about Brattleboro at this moment is how few of those we have,
It's a good point.
considering the scale of the
Mm-hmm.
community. Whereas I think some smaller communities like, say, Marlborough or Guilford have more of them,
Yeah.
or they're more obvious to folks because there are actually very few commercial spaces in that community. Um,
Well, I,
I know Whitingham has like a really quite vibrant senior lunch scene.
yeah.
Whereas, Brattleboro senior lunch scene is not as vibrant, right? So it's really like it's a very interesting thing when you get to scale like what's available and what's not. But I agree with you. Third spaces are everything.
Hmm. And in the last couple of minutes we have, you're about to start the new session. Any like key points you're kind of focusing on or um,
Housing, healthcare, corporate tax reform, and education. And I think we've hit really all of those in our time together today.
mhm.
The Brattleboro Legislative Delegation had a great community meeting last night at the library, one of our best third spaces. And we're going to be doing those the second Saturday of every month at 10:30 in the morning.
Okay. Well, Emilie Kornheiser, representative for Brattleboro, aka Wyndham 7. So glad you could join us today. And I
Glad
wanted
to
to
be here.
remind folks that the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW every Friday at 2 p.m., rebroadcasted on Wednesdays. And hey, everyone, have a good weekend.